Bonjour, hi. So this video here is all about the notes for Le Passé Composé Part 2. Yes, there is a second part to this concept. So if you feel pretty confident about everything we've learned so far about Le Passé Composé, you're in the right place. However, if you still are struggling, you don't completely understand everything that we learned in the previous video, Le Passé Composé Part 1, then please stop this video right now and just ask me a question, send me an email, because this concept here builds off of what we already know, and so it might be a little bit confusing if you don't completely understand what we previously learned. So, without further ado, if you're ready to learn about Le Passé Composé Part 2, then let's get started. Before we dive into the brand new material, let's just refresh our memories and sort of review what we already know about the Passé Composé. So we already know that the Passé Composé describes actions in the past. We call it the past tense. We also know that we need two verbs to create Passé Composé sentences. We need our auxiliary, and we also need our past participle. Now, so far, we've been using avoir as our auxiliary, but today we're going to learn about a couple different verbs that use être as the auxiliary instead, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But we already know as well that past participles are formed depending on the verb type. So if I have an ER verb as my past participle, it will become E with an accent. If I have an IR verb, then as a past participle, it will have I as an ending. And then finally here, if I'm dealing with an RE verb and I want to change that into its past participle form, it will change to a U on the ending. Now, as we know, because this is French, there are several irregular verbs that don't follow these standard past participle rules. And some of those exceptions are avoir, which would change to eu, faire, which would change to fait, boire, which would change to bu, mettre would change to mis, and dire would change to dit. Now, these are just 5 commonly seen irregular verbs that are used in passé composé sentences quite frequently, but there are several others. If you're looking for a more complete list, check the video that I posted about the Passé Composé Part 1. I have a really long list there that you can copy down or just make note of. Okay, so if you're feeling confident with this material here, you're like, yeah, I know this already, then let's get started on the brand new stuff. Okay, so here we go. This is new material now. Please make sure that you're copying this down or making note of it so that you have the information readily available. So what else is there to know about the Passé Composé? Well, as I kind of alluded to before, the majority of the verbs we've been dealing with take avoir as our auxiliary in the Passé Composé. But there are a certain select few verbs that take être as their auxiliary. In fact, there are 16 of those verbs, and we are going to learn about those today. Okay, so the formula stays the same. It's still, we have our subject, so that's the je, tu, il, elle, whoever we're dealing with. Then we have our auxiliary, and then we have our past participle. The only huge difference is that être is the auxiliary for these 16 special verbs that we're putting in the past tense. Okay, so the formula stays the same. There's just a few little tweaks depending on the verb that we're putting into the past tense. So let's learn what these 16 special verbs are so that we know that if we see them, we can use être as the auxiliary instead. So here is the list of 16 verbs in French that take être as their auxiliary in the Passé Composé. Every other verb, for the most part in French, when you turn it into the Passé Composé, will use avoir. But if you see one of these 16 verbs and you're asked to put it into the Passé Composé, then you have to know that the auxiliary is not going to be avoir, it's going to be être. So let's just break this list down. I'll show you what each of the words mean, and then I'll also show you their past participles because some of them are a little funky and they don't follow the same rules. The majority of them follow those standard past participle formation rules, but some of them don't. So let's just get into this, and I would recommend that you copy these down on a piece of paper. I know it's a lot, but I promise you, you're going to want to know these verbs and have them somewhere to access. So here is our first verb. We've got devenir. That means to become in English, and as a past participle in French, it would become devenu. Next off, we've got revenir, which means to come back somewhere. And that as a past participle in French would become revenu. Next is monter, which means to go up or to climb. As a past participle, it follows the same ER verb rules, and it becomes monter, E with an accent on the end. Next off, rester, which means to stay, and it becomes rester as its past participle. Sortir means to go out, becomes sorti as a past participle. Venir means to come somewhere, becomes venu as its past participle. Aller, we know this verb well, it means to go, and as a past participle, it becomes aller, E with an accent. Naître means to be born, and it becomes N, E with an accent. Nice and short and simple. Descendre means to descend, and it becomes descendu as a past participle. Entrer means to enter, and it becomes entrer in the past tense. Retourner means to go back or to return, becomes retourner as a past participle. Tomber means to fall, tomber as a past participle. Rentrer means to go home, specifically to go home, and it becomes rentrer as a past participle. Arriver means to arrive, and as a past participle, arriver. Mourir means to die, and as a past participle, it becomes mort, M-O-R-T. Very different from its initial infinitive verb. And then the last on our list here is partir, which means to leave, and that as a past participle becomes parti. So again, please make sure that you have these copied down somewhere. I know it seems like a lot of writing or a lot of typing, but you do need to know these 16 verbs so that, again, if you come to an activity, a writing exercise, or even just using it a little bit more fluently in French in the future, you'll know that these 16 verbs take être as their auxiliary in the passé composé. A helpful way to remember these 16 verbs, because believe me, I know it's a lot. I was there once too. But a really helpful way to remember them is by using the acronym Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp. Now, if you copy down the verbs exactly how I had them on the chart here, you'll see that over here I've already bolded and underlined the start of each of the letters. And these letters here at the start, they spell out Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp. So if you remember Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp and you practice writing that out a couple times with these verbs, then it will become a little bit easier to memorize them and to remember them. I know it's a lot, but this is the gist of the passé composé with être. These 16 verbs are so special, we really have to pay some special attention to them. Okay, now there's one more major concept that I want to add on to this. So let's just get into that and then we'll be done with the notes component of this video. Right, so this is something that we've dealt with before in terms of adjectives in French, but we've never had to deal with them with verbs for the most part. So here, with the passé composé and verbs that take être as their auxiliary, so those 16 verbs, they need to agree with their subject, both the gender and the number. So to make those past participles agree with their subject, we need to add agreements to the end of the past participle. Okay, so let's copy down this chart and go through it so that you kind of get a better understanding of what I mean. If my subject is masculine singular, so if I'm talking about one dude, I'm not going to add any agreement whatsoever. It would just be il est tombé as my example. Okay, as you can see, nothing added on to the end of it because I'm just talking about one guy or one object. If, however, I'm talking about a feminine singular subject, then the agreement I would add is an E onto the end of my past participle. The example, elle est tombée, she fell. and I need to have that E at the end of the past participle there to just make it agree with the fact that I'm talking about one girl. If I'm talking about a masculine plural subject, so multiple dudes or multiple masculine objects, I would add a single S to the end of the past participle. Ils sont tombés with an S on the end. And then finally here, feminine plural, a group of girls or a group of feminine objects, I would add ES. Elles sont tombées with that ES on the end. So again, we've dealt with these adjective agreements before when talking about adjectives, but this is new, adding them onto the ends of our verbs. So just remember that you need to add these agreements only to passé composé verbs that take être. So it's only the 16 Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp verbs that you'll have to worry about adding agreements onto their past participles. If you are conjugating just a run-of-the-mill regular verb that takes avoir as its auxiliary into the passé composé, then you do not, I repeat, you do not add any of these agreements to that. Only the Vandertramp verbs take these agreements, essentially. So that's an important thing to note as well. Okay, so if you're feeling okay up to this point with the 16 Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp verbs and their past participles and with the agreements, then let's get on to a little bit of practice just to put all of this to good use. All right, so I have my page set up here with some questions and some helpful charts so that we can practice the passé composé with être. Here I have my 5 questions. Here I have my formula for the passé composé, just as a little reminder to myself that I need both an auxiliary and a past participle to have a properly formatted passé composé sentence. Here I have my être verb chart because, as you know, the verbs that we're dealing with now, when put into the passé composé, take être as their auxiliary, not avoir like we've been practicing with. And down here I have my agreements chart, just again as a little reminder to myself that depending on what the subject of my sentence is, I might need to add an agreement onto the end of my past participle. So if I were you, I would take a second just to copy down these 5 questions, but I am going to go through these charts right here now with you just to make sure that you have all the information you need to complete these questions. So first off, on our être verb chart, if my subject is je, we know that être will become suis, S-U-I-S. If my subject is tu, then être will become a, pronounced a, but spelt E-S. If I'm talking about one dude or one dudette or one object, il, elle, or on, then être would become a, spelled E-S-T. If our subject is nous, être will become somme, S-O-M-M-E-S. If I'm dealing with vous, then être will become et. And as you can see here, it should have un petit chapeau, a little hat over top of the E. And then finally, if I'm talking about a group of guys, group of girls, être will become sont, S-O-N-T. So here's être. This is what you need to know for your auxiliary. Now over here, for the agreements, if I'm dealing with a masculine singular object, I'm not going to add any agreement onto my past participle. Okay, so don't need to add anything. If I'm dealing with a feminine singular subject, then I will add one E to the end of my past participle. If I'm dealing with masculine plural subjects, then I will add one S to the end of my past participle. And if I'm dealing with something that's a feminine and a plural, I would add ES to the end. Okay, so you have all the materials you need now to complete these 5 questions. So pause the video, try and work these guys out on your own, and then right after that, we will get started on going through them together. Okay, so let's go through these questions together now. So for number 1, I've got Bob, and then the verb that I have here is naître. And if you look back on your list of the Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp verbs, you'll know that naître means to be born. So here we are trying to say Bob was born, essentially. So by following our structure here, we know that we're still going to just start off with Bob. The subject is going to stay the same. Now, our auxiliary has to be être. So since I'm dealing with one dude, one person, Bob, that's like saying il, he. So être is going to become a, E-S-T. Bob, a. And now again, you're probably going to have to look at your verb chart, or rather the chart of different Van der Trant verbs, just to make sure that you're getting the past participles correctly, because again, some of them unfortunately don't follow those same rules that we've learned. But here for naître, the correct past participle is né, just like that. Bob est né. And because Bob is one dude, a masculine singular subject, if I look down on my agreements here, I'm going to add nothing. I don't need to add anything to the end of it. Okay, so Bob est né, that is the correct answer for number 1. For number 2, we've got Susie and arrivé. So we want to say that Susie arrived. So let's start off by rewriting our subject, Susie. Now again, since I'm talking about one person, yes, it's a girl this time, but still just one person, être is going to become a, E-S-T. Now again, arriver, that means to arrive. And if you look on your chart of different past participles for Van der Trant verbs, you'll know that it becomes arriver. Excuse my formatting here. There we go. Now, one thing here, let's look at our subject, Susie. Susie is feminine, feminine singular. So agreements, yes, I need to add an E to the end. So it becomes Susie est arrivée. Thanks, I'm typing in front, or in English. There you have it. Susie est arrivée. The next one is nous and sortir. So here, I will write out nous, être, nous becomes sont, nous sommes, and then the proper past participle is sorti. Now, let's look at the subject nous. What do we know about the number? Nous sort of implies that we're talking about multiple people, us. So yes, we know there is going to be an S. However, do we know if we is strictly talking about a group of guys or a group of girls, or is it mixed? No, we don't know. Just by looking at this, it doesn't tell us anything about the gender. So this could be talking about a group of girls. So in this, what we can include is the E in brackets. Nous sommes sortis. Okay, so that is just there to cover our bases, implying that this could be a group of girls. We don't really completely know at this point, but we do know for certain that it is plural. So that's why the S comes after, and that isn't in brackets, whereas the E is in brackets. So that's just one thing to keep in mind going forward on some of the other activities, okay? Next one, number 4, we've got je and descendre. So my subject here is je, obviously. Être would become suis, so je suis. And then my past participle for descendre is descendu. Now, again, looking at je, you could interpret this as talking about yourself. So if you are masculine, then you don't need to add anything on the end of it. However, if you are completing this activity and you are feminine, then you need to have that E on the end. So I'm going to put the E in brackets there, just because at this point in time, depending on who answers this question, there may be an E agreement or there may not be. And the last one here, we've got Tina, Claire, et Frank tombé. So I'll write out my subjects once again. Tina, Claire, et Frank. Now I'm talking about a group of people, 3 people. So here I'm going to be changing être to sont, S-O-N-T. Okay, now the past participle for tomber, it's a nice and easy Van der Trant verb because it follows that same ER becomes E with an accent rule, thankfully. And now here, let's look at the group. What does it consist of? Consists of 3 people, so we know it's going to be plural. However, what about the gender? It consists of Tina, Claire, and Frank. So we've got 2 girls and 1 guy. Now, if you remember me talking about adjective agreements in the past, you'll know that even if you have a group of like 1 million girls, if there's 1 dude in that group, the group itself is considered masculine. So I am not going to be adding an ES. It's not a feminine group, even though it's majority females. I will, however, be adding an S on the end because there are multiple people in the group. Tina, Claire, et Frank sont tombés with an S on the end, and there you have it. So if you're feeling pretty confident with this structure, if you feel like you know the Passé Composé structure, if you feel confident with our Van der Tramp verbs, you know that you have to use être as the auxiliary with them, and that you might have to add an agreement, then what I would like you to do is continue on in your learning guide to page 14. On the front of page 14, you're given 10 different sentences, and each of them are Van der Tramp verbs. So you will just be using être as the auxiliary. And then if you turn to the back of page 14, there's 10 more questions. However, the verbs that are used are mixed up. Some of them will take être as the auxiliary, just like we've been practicing with these questions here. But some of them actually take avoir. They're just regular run-of-the-mill verbs that aren't part of the Dr. Mrs. Van der Tramp collection. So be on the lookout for those guys. Once you've finished both the front and back of page 14, what I'd like you to do is obviously submit it on my blueprint. And as you're working through them, if you're having some difficulties, do not hesitate to send me an email or message me on Microsoft Teams, and I'd be more than happy to help. All right, bonne chance, and let me know if you need any help. Goodbye. Au revoir.